embrace innovative volunteers.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce and welcome our keynote speaker for this morning, Dr. Richard Munang, who is a climate change and development policy expert serving as the Regional Climate Change Coordinator for the United Nations Environment Program based in Nairobi, Kenya. Dr. Munang holds a PhD in environmental change and policy from the University of Nottingham in the UK and an executive certificate in climate change and energy policy from Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. He has led policy and ground actions, transferring continentally and globally sourced innovative climate action practices to countries which in the process have helped build both human and institutional capacities to drive sustainable agro-industrialization for inclusive wealth creation. A champion for youth through an approach he calls innovative volunteerism, he engages young people to become climate action solution providers. Dr. Munang is also the author of a book, Making Africa Work Through the Power of Innovative Volunteerism. He's participated in a wide variety of research projects and has published over 500 articles in both international peer-reviewed journals and magazines. We extend a warm welcome to you, Dr. Richard Munang, and look very forward to hearing your keynote on the African engineer and context, seizing the opportunities in driving real change, climate resilient development in Africa. Dr. Munang, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thank you for the introduction to the organizers of the conference and invited guests, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It's a great honor for me to join you for the 27th Annual FIDIC Africa Infrastructure Conference. And I will use an African proverb to describe how I perceive this gathering today. And it says that where there are experts, there will be no lack of learners. This is a congregation of experts that provides us with a great opportunity to learn from one another. And in this period of learning, just take a second and ask yourself this question: what is the most important equation in engineering? I bet your answer will depend on your specialty, but most importantly, your answer should center on one aspect: context. Engineering, a profession that is as old as mankind, is man's attempt at adapting the environment to better suit his or her needs. Whether you are talking of the Pyramid of Giza in Egypt, which was man's attempt at securing the legacy of departed kings, or the Shadoof, which was among the earliest irrigation methods practiced in Africa, engineering has been at the core of man's civilization across the globe to this day. As a matter of fact, our interaction today would not have been possible without the marvels of digital technology, which is a modern-day engineering accomplishment. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, with this hindsight, the most important equation in engineering is that which most accurately and completely represents the contextual realities we face at any given time, and whose solutions lead to the most optimal outcomes that maximizes socio-economic benefits while minimizing risk and cost. How can we achieve this for Africa? Under the changing climate as we speak today, how can we achieve this in Africa? With a burgeoning youth population, with millions getting into the labor market each and every day without jobs, how can we ensure that at least we can drive infrastructure for the collective benefit of all, as earlier speakers have already alluded to? And this forms the close of my discussion. And it starts with appreciating three fundamental elements of Africa's context. Because let's face it, the challenges Africa's face today, sometimes the engineering profession, which we know is universally associated with providing solutions to complex developmental challenges. Africa, on the other hand, is a continent synonymous with adversity. Yes, it is. Consequently, engineering and Africa are akin to two opposite poles of a magnet. They attract. And Africa faces significant gaps in built environment and infrastructure. For example, En route, sub-Saharan Africa, as we already know, has the lowest density of paved roads networks globally. Moreover, it is the only region where road density has declined over the past 20 years. A similar trend applies to the railroads. Passing, as we know, represents a similar story. Africa faces a 50-year gap to achieve full coverage. In other words, all factors held constant, Africa will need the next 50 years to cover its passing gap. When it comes to the telecommunications, while there has been dramatic progress over the past quarter century, the region is still far behind other regions. Internet density, for instance, is at 16.7 per 100 people, which is less than that of any other benchmark region. Energy is another area. 2/3 of the global population in the continent without power in the continent, making Africa literally a dark continent. 620 million citizens energy impoverished. They lack access to grid electricity. They lack access to grid electricity, and power costs 3 to 6 times what grid consumers pay across the globe. This is unfortunate, and paradoxically, in addition, unprecedented frequent power outages cause firms in low and middle income countries, majority of these countries being in the African continent, up to $300 billion each and every year. When we talk about agriculture, which is the most inclusive and potentially the catalytic sector in the continent that employs over 65% of the African workforce drawing their livelihood from this agriculture. Up to 37% of what is produced each and every year ends up being lost as post-harvest losses because of inadequate processing. And cumulatively, these losses represent $48 billion each and every year. These are losses in income. These are losses in enterprises. These are losses in revenue opportunities for the region's economies. And compounding this trail of losses is climate change, which is the elephant in the room, whose impacts have already exacerbated the precarious socioeconomic conditions in the continent, as we already know. Whether we're talking droughts and floods, submerging and forcing people to seek sanctuaries in places not their own. This has come not just to add another burden, but a significant impact on the built environment. For example, flooding costs anywhere between 10 billion to 9% of GDP in destroyed infrastructure costs annually in some of the most impacted countries across the continent. Cumulatively, Africa's GDP is projected to suffer 50 to 85% decline in less than 30 years from today, and up to 75% decline in incomes, all because of climate change in those impacts. And the built environment and infrastructure will suffer much more. To make matters worse, the recent United Nations Environment Programme Emissions Gap Report points to the fact that the globe is still heading on above 3.2 degrees warming, making the risk of these losses that I've mentioned even higher. And now a new variable, the COVID-19 global emergency, has been introduced into this already very dire precarious scenario. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the second aspect, in addition to these challenges that are enumerated, is opportunities. Because we know that every adversity carries with it a seed of equal or higher benefit. Amidst the challenges that we see, they are disguised opportunity. There exist contemporary, cost-effective, climate-resilient solutions that Africa's engineers should perfect, that Africa's engineers should apply optimally. For example, the risk of flooding continues to increase. For African cities, worsened by a 14% higher risk for sea level rise in African coastlines compared to the global average. In response, African engineers need to increasingly prioritize resilient infrastructure principles. These include utilization of green infrastructure, such as rehabilitating wetlands in cities so they can become natural drainage for floodwaters, or improve city planning to better protect natural systems such as wetlands and natural floodplains to ensure they continue to provide buffer against excess storm waters, or rehabilitation of mangroves in coastal areas to act as storm breaks. The application of such green infrastructure solutions in other cities has proven cost-effective as well, being over 6 times cheaper and provide an up to 1.5 billion in savings compared to alternative grey infrastructure engineered solutions. And examples are many. Whether we're talking about these solutions in the context of the realities we face today, this example relates to the paradox of seemingly getting lost sometimes, especially in a region where we're talking today. 257 million people went to bed last night. They will go to bed tonight hungry. They'll go to bed hungry, but the same region suffers 48 billion US dollars in post-harvest losses experienced in the most important sector, agriculture. And for this, engineering must think hard to devise solutions, decentralizing of simple solar dryer yet effective climate action solutions to enable preservation and increasing shelf life of perishable, can increase incomes up to 30 times. That's data and information we get from the work that we do, and create diverse enterprise opportunities, including for developers of such technologies. We will tap into the 48 billion we lost a year. Context is important. When we take waste recovery, which is still another area as I speak on these challenges and opportunities, Africa holds the unenviable position of being the second most polluted continent on the planet. The cost of pollution on the continent exceeds 400 billion annually, much higher than the cost of solving malnutrition and sanitation challenges on the continent. But waste recovery solutions can go a long way in not only solving pollution, but also creating alternative products that can enhance productivity of other sectors of the economy, such as the built environment. For instance, if we take plastic waste can be recovered into paving tires that are 30% to 7 times cheaper than concrete, up to 5 times more heat insulation, produce 95% lower greenhouse gas emissions in production, and are stronger and more durable than concrete. This will also unlock multiple enterprise opportunities, especially for the young people in the continent today, whom we need to ensure that anything we do will create opportunities for them, starting from waste pickers and sorters who would have no chance in the concrete block industry. The health advantage are also immense, as they would contribute to less plastic pollution, a phenomenon responsible for 1 death in every 30 seconds in poorer countries, majority of them in the African continent. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the third element of this equation is strategic frameworks. People have jokingly sometimes say Africa is a cemetery for policy. Yes, it is. From global to continental and on to national levels, Africa has a battery of statutory provisions that create a conducive environment for engineering to be applied optimally in unlocking climate resilient, inclusive, and accelerated socio-economic opportunities for people in the continent. At the global level, all African countries as we speak today have signed up to Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, which are premised on leaving no one behind in driving inclusive growth. Better still, all countries in the African continent have ratified the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which call each and every one of us to act and to lead by one fundamental principle: to make the right to a dignity life possible for every human being. The continent is also a leader in ratifying the Global Climate Change Paris Agreement, which calls for action from all professions. 98% of countries in the continent have ratified this agreement, with diverse commitments to green development, including in infrastructure and the built environment. At the regional level, we have the African Union Agenda 2063, which stands as a lightning beacon to the African continent to create the Africa we want. And once again, there are clear targets for infrastructure and the built environment. Nationally, every country in this continent dedicated climate change legislation in addition to sectoral provisions such as feed-in tariffs policies in energy, climate-smart agricultural policies, road, housing, urban planning strategies and policies, among others, all require engineering interventions to achieve the overriding objective of high quality of life for everyone in the continent. But as is the case with many provisions in the African continent, the disconnect is always in implementation. For example, Africa is the region lacking in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals globally, and risks not achieving them in the set time. 46% of all African countries have plastic bans, making Africa the continent with the highest percentage of national plastic bans globally. But despite this legislative success, Africa remains the second most polluted continent on the planet Earth. These are just two of the many other examples of the disconnect between provisions and actualization that is commonplace across the continent. But we must make context count. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, how can the engineering profession in Africa adapt these fundamental aspects of context to unlock inclusive solutions and competitive growth? And I will leave you with 5 takeaways. And the first is, a disruptive application of known technologies is necessary. In this information age, knowledge has become liberalized. There are billions of web pages available on demand that explain virtually nearly everything. An engineer sitting in Africa today in any country can, through a simple web search and a few online subscriptions, gain access to some of the most advanced engineering modeling tools that exist in the globe today. They can access data, they can access information and knowledge from some of the most distinguished schools of engineering globally. The bigger challenge is in contextualizing such resources to maximize the socio-economic benefit in each setting. Context matters. Consider roads, for instance. An engineer in Africa can gain access to some of the most modern simulation tools that exist in designing dual carriageways. But the bigger question will be in deciding whether such dueling will be used to link cities or link high potential enterprise locations to markets to maximize macro and microeconomic returns. The fact that dual carriage roadways are used to connect cities does not mean that is the exact same product that Africa needs to maximize impact to its economic productivity. We need more priority on routes linking production sites to markets. For example, a route linking agro-produce to markets and collection points to recoup the $48 billion lost annually and turn this into more incomes, jobs, and revenues is what is needed. Investment in solar, for instance, are traditionally focused on rooftop solar. But prioritizing off-grid power solutions dedicated to power agro value chain and unlock more enterprise opportunities will be a better fit for Africa. And therefore, it is time that African engineers start making such planning decisions over and above the traditional belt transfer to context without necessarily thinking about context. The second most important takeaway is making the informal sector the core target of engineering solutions. You cannot ignore your most important sector. Africa's track record in moving projects to financial close remains dismal. For example, even with ready financing and technical expertise, up to 80% of infrastructure projects in Africa fail at the feasibility and business plan stage, simply because they do not make business sense. A first step to solving this paradox is to work with the most significant segment of Africa's economies as the primary market, the informal sector. You cannot ignore the bulk of your population. Up to 80% of Africa's productive economy is driven through the informal sector. That's a fact. Engineers need to consider devising competitive, marketable solutions that fit the dynamics of this segment of the economy as a primary consideration. The fixation of working with governments as primary clients is clearly taking the short end of the rope and missing the bulk of those who are supposed to be at the center of decision-making and center of action. And that takes me to the third point, which is skills retooling. In driving the above paradigms, the first question each and every one of us must answer honestly is, how well are my set of skills suited? Then the next question should be, which skilling gaps must I fill to position myself as an engineer that offers contextual solutions to Africa's development? This is what I call skills retooling. Improving, refining, and adapting one's skills to align with offering contextual solutions to the African market. Through one of the biggest mindset change tools we have developed called innovative volunteerism, engaging youth and structurally guiding them to inspire them to not only retool their skills, but to see opportunities in challenges and turn those challenges into opportunities, especially targeting the informal sector and doing so in an enterprising dimension that guarantees market longevity. And that takes me to the fourth point. We must cultivate real passion. No matter what we do in this continent, we should never ever forget that passion is the fuel that moves ideas into real life solutions. Regardless of who we are and where we are, if you lack in enduring passion, then we will run out of steam in no time. The biggest gap we suffer today is the passion and inspiration gap, which is needed and urgently needed to drive meaningful development for people and planet. But what ignites passion in the first place is to be attached to a cause that is greater than each and every one of us. Without passion, no matter how much you give, you throw money at every problem and waste it and end up with no result. Passion is the real winner because regardless of what we contribute, if it falls on passionate youth, then no transformation will occur. It is people who drive development for themselves. We do not do development for people. All we can do is to facilitate through our inspirational actions. If we fail to do so, we will be missing out on the bigger enabler of sustainability, which is a self-motivated, a self-driven people. And that takes me to the last point. Each and every one of us must become a transformational values-based leader. In the mid-40s to the late 50s and on to the early 60s, as the clamor for self-determined role reached fever pitch in the continent, there are self-appointed men and women who espouse boldness, unshakable unity, dedication, selflessness, and fidelity to a struggle to liberate the people. A task which was their own unborrowed vision, a calling they had to execute. Their every move was governed by a laser-sharp focus on clarity of vision to win independence for their people. No amount of persecution, lack, threats could stand on their way. They did it not for themselves, but for the future generations they had no hope of ever meeting. They were joined ideologically in the struggle by timeless values of selflessness and character of humility. They did not postpone this call for a day in the hope for elusive perfection. This is the foundation of values-based leadership that we all must identify with and champion wherever we are to drive socio-economic liberation. It is leadership premised on selflessness and taking personal responsibility to touch many lives with what we do. Today, Africa needs socio-economic liberation. And among the most important areas as we engage these gears of socio-economic liberation is the engineering profession. Let your actions be guided by the singular purpose to enable the maximization of climate resilient socio-economic return for Africa economies and her people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Richard. You've given us a lot to think about, and your presentation has gotten our Q&As and chat box moving as well. I think you've given us quite a lot of introspection to do. So I do thank you for that.